Good evening. I'm glad you joined us for our Wednesday night Bible study. A couple of announcements. First of all, we'll be meeting for in-person service this Sunday, February the 14th. And we'll be meeting in the Family Life Center. Again, we're going to leave the sanctuary for those who are not comfortable coming into the sanctuary with a large crowd. And so please note that and come on and join us. Looking forward to seeing you. It's kind of been difficult just doing this, having these services separately. Looking forward to being back together. Another thing, when you get to the Family Life Center, if you come in there, you're going to see some changes. There have been some changes to the foyer area. There's been some changes in the Family Life Center itself. And so there's been a lot of volunteers up here working, doing a lot, giving a lot of time. And so I think you'll be surprised if you come. So come on and take a look and see what has happened in the Family Life Center. Right now, let's take a look at our Bible study, 1 Peter chapter 3, and we're in verse 7. I heard about a kindergarten Sunday school teacher teaching her class. She was teaching about creation. And she had gotten to the part where God had created Adam, and he looked and saw that Adam was alone. And so he saw that he needed a wife, and we do, men, but he needed a wife. And so he took one of his ribs and created a wife. One of the little boys was listening very intently, and so that week, as the week went on, his mother came into the room where he was. He was laying down. He looked like something was wrong, usually up and active, running all over the place. And she said, "What's the matter, honey?" He said, "My side's hurting. I think I'm having a wife." Some of us need to recognize that we already have a wife and start acting accordingly. It's very sad to me to see couples just existing. And I think you know what I mean. You're living under the same roof and you're going through the motions and you do the things that you're supposed to do, and yet there's no real happy relationship. When we first moved to one of the churches that I pastored, there was a couple there that was very involved and had been very involved in the church for a long time. And they came, sat together, sat in Sunday school together, sat in service together, and just seemed like a happy couple. But we found out a few weeks into our being there that they weren't even living in the same house. They were on the verge of divorce, and they were just going through the motions because it was what they were supposed to do. They wanted to keep up a front for everybody else to see. And that's sad to me, that a couple would go through just going through the motions and putting up a front when the Bible tells us exactly how we can actually be happy in our marriage. Now, we looked at the ladies last week in the first 6 verses. We're going to look in verse 7 this week. It's only one verse to us men, but it does have a lot to say. And so we will just start off by reading it, and then we'll work our way through it. 1 Peter chapter 3, in verse 7, it says, "Husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered." And so he begins by saying likewise. Now, he has just told the slaves to be subject to their masters, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands, and he says likewise. And so God has put together a system in the family, and men, we are responsible for the well-being of our family. We're responsible for their physical well-being. We're responsible for their spiritual well-being. And unfortunately, there's a whole lot of men who don't take that role seriously. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22, Paul says to the wives, submit to your own husband as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church. He is the Savior of the body. Now, how is Christ the head of the church? Well, because he gave himself for the church. And so that's one way that he has become the head of the church, or that he is the head of the church, is that the only way to get into the church is through him. And so he is the head of the church, and he gave himself for the church. And so we are to give ourselves, whatever that means, give ourselves for the good of our families, for the good of our marriage, for the good of our wives. We are to be leaders in our home. And there's a whole lot of men who are not leading. There's a whole lot of men who are not leading spiritually. If it weren't for women, there would be a whole lot of kids who would grow up never having any spiritual training at all. And so, men, we are to be leaders. You know, there's the tendency, especially I guess in our country, I don't know about other countries, but especially here, to not teach boys to become men. In other words, they grow up and they're still boys looking for a mother. They want somebody to cook for them, want somebody to clean for them, want somebody to do all the things and to even tell them what to do and take care of all their situations, all of their finances and all of the things that come up. And men, we are to be that, we take that role. We are to be men and lead our families. Doesn't mean we don't listen to our wives. Doesn't mean that they don't have a better approach or a better idea about some things, and they do. And so you would do well to listen to your wife. You would do well to heed, but you are the one that's responsible to lead your family. And so Paul tells us in Ephesians, husbands, love your wives. That's where he starts, and he says that several times. Husbands, love your wives. Peter doesn't say that. He just tells us how to do it. And so when we look at this verse, what we're looking at is Peter's instructions on how husbands are to love their wives. And the first thing he tells us is that we are to live with our wives. He says, husbands, likewise, dwell with them. And so we are to live with our wives. Husband, you are to live with your wife. Now, he's not just saying stay in the same house with them. I mean, that's part of it. He's not just saying don't move back into your parents' home. That is part of it. And he's definitely not just saying don't go live with somebody else, some girlfriend or somebody else's wife. I mean, that's obvious. But what he is saying really here is be there when you're there. Live with your wife. Live with her. Don't just exist in the same house. Don't just go through the motions, and don't just put up a front. Men, we tend to apply ourselves to our work, and we tend to get our fulfillment from our work. And so we pour ourselves into our work. And then we also find recreational activities, things that we do. And unfortunately, many times those things take the place of spending time at home, spending time with our wives. It's not just about being committed to staying. It's about being committed to the marriage. In Genesis chapter 2, God was the one that described the marriage, and here's what he said. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And so how is it that you become one flesh? Well, first of all, you leave your father and mother. You leave that other family. It's not that you don't have anything to do with them. It's just that they are second priority to your new family, your wife. And so we are to live with them, but we're to live with them being there. You know, being there mentally, being there spiritually, being with your wife. I remember a time when back in my younger years, I played ball all the time. Even after we were married, we played basketball when it was basketball season, volleyball when it was volleyball season, softball during softball season. And during softball season, I would play on two different teams. We had played one at the complex at Meridian, softball complex in Meridian, one out in Sucalina. So I was playing in two different leagues, which meant 3-4 nights a week. And then on the weekends, I would play tournaments on Saturdays and sometimes Friday and Saturday. And, played all the time. Well, there was one particular tournament that we were already qualified for state tournament, and we were trying to qualify for a regional tournament, and we had to play in this tournament to do so, and either come in first or second. Well, Melanie, we had built a house, and it was time for us to go fill it up with furniture or find some furniture that we could afford to put in there. And so she said, hey, can we go look for some furniture Saturday? Well, Saturday was the day of the tournament, the qualifying tournament. And I made the right decision that day. I said, yes, we are going to go. Everybody on the softball team and even my family couldn't understand how I didn't go play in that important tournament to go and look for furniture with Melanie. I'm going to tell you this, I don't always get it right. I didn't always get it right back then, and I don't always get it right now. Melanie always said she liked going to those softball tournaments, but in that one particular case, I got it right. It's much more important to spend time with the one who you have committed your life to than it is to be entertained. Even your work should come secondary to your marriage. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, Paul's talking to the church about how we're to relate to one another, and it especially is applicable to marriage. He says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interests of others. And so Paul says, don't just look out for your own interest. Don't just put yourself first all the time. Look out for your wife's interests. You can be in the same room and be ignoring each other. Men, close the top on your laptop. Take your phone, put it in the other room, turn the TV off, and sit there and have a conversation with your wife. Live with your wife. And so the first thing Peter tells us to do is if we're going to love our wives, we got to live with them. We've actually got to be there mentally, physically. I mean, you can't develop a relationship if you're not there physically, but you also can't develop a relationship if you're not there mentally. If you're thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow, if you're thinking about how you're going to hunt, or how you're going to fish, or how you're going to play golf, or how you're going to play softball, or whatever it is you're thinking about, you are not really there. And so he says, live with your wives. The second thing he says is know them. Verse 7, husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding. And so he says, live with your wife with understanding. And that phrase could be translated according to knowledge. And so live with your wife according to knowledge. In other words, you can't really meet her needs unless you know what they are. And so live with her seeking to understand her, seeking to know her. And he's not just talking about the things on her driver's license. He's not just talking about knowing what color her eyes are and her hair and how much she weighs and what address she has. He's talking about deep, intimate knowledge of your wife. There's only one way to get that, and that is to spend time with her, spend time studying her and listening to her. James chapter 1 verse 19 says, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. And so he says, spend time listening. You'll do a whole lot better. You'll learn a whole lot more if you listen, if you spend time listening. Yogi Berra said this, that great philosopher of the generation past. He says you can hear an awful lot just by listening. You can hear an awful lot just by listening. And that's a pretty profound statement, given that we look like we're listening and a lot of times aren't. Sometimes thinking about what we're going to say or what we're going to do or where we're headed or something like that. Know your wife. You know, most couples, according to marriage counselors, spend about 30 minutes per week in meaningful conversation. 30 minutes per week in meaningful conversation. That's what, 4 minutes, a little over 4 minutes a day? Is that right? 7 days in a week? Yep. 4 minutes a day, 4.5 minutes a day. That's not a whole lot. And so if you're going to get to know your wife, it's going to be because you make the commitment to spend time talking with her and listening to her without looking over her shoulder at the clock or the TV or whatever's over there, without your phone, looking down at your phone, without looking at your computer. No, sitting there and actually having a conversation with her. You know, it's important for us to understand that we don't process things the same way they do. If you don't understand that, if you don't ever grasp that, it's going to be very difficult for you throughout your marriage. We don't process the same way most women do. And, I can't categorize and say everybody's like this, but it is pretty much fitting. There's a book that came out, it's been several decades ago, and the name of it was something like this: Men are like waffles, women are like spaghetti. And the gist of the book was, when we are dealing with a subject, when we're having a conversation, men, we tend to get in the box, whatever the conversation is about, we get in that box and we logically seek to solve whatever the issue is. And we go through that, and then we say the solution, and then we're done. We move into another box, and then we stay in that box until we get that solved, and then we move to another box. Ladies don't generally process things that way. They're more like spaghetti. Things are laying on top of each other and laying on top of each other, and they talk about what we're talking about, and then it may lead to something that they see as related and we don't, and then that may lead to something else, and that may lead to something else, and that may lead to something else, and they come back around and they make the decision that way. They come to the conclusion that way. Again, you can't say every one of them's like that, but just understand that they don't process things generally, and your wife is not going to process things exactly the way you do. Spend the time following them, learning about them until you know how they process, and then commit yourself to helping them work through whatever the situation is, whatever's going on. If you don't believe that we are different, then just go shopping. If I'm going shopping for a blue shirt, I go to where they sell blue shirts, and I go over to where the shirts are, and I look for a blue one. When I find a blue one, I look for the size that fits me, and I get my blue shirt, and I go pay for it, and I leave. That's the way I shop, and a lot of you men probably do the same thing. If you don't believe that we're different, then just go into the ladies section. The men's section, you got the pants, you got the shirts, you got the socks, you got the casual pants, casual shirts, and you go, if you want a dress shirt, you go where the dress shirts are. You want a casual t-shirt, you go to where the t-shirts are. You go in the women's department, it's not like that. They got a few dresses here, they got some over there, they got some over there, and they got some over there. They got some pants over here, and some pants over there, and some pants over there, and some pants over there, and the shirts over there, and shirts over there, and coats over there, and shirts over there, and they're spread. I mean, and you walk in, and we're looking for a blue top for Melanie. Well, I'm looking for the blue tops, and I see some shirts over there and some shirts over there, and I'll just head to where I think the blue ones might be and the ones that are on sale. And she wanders over and looks at the skirt. Oh, look at this brown skirt. Well, I thought we were looking for a blue shirt. We are, but look how cute this is. And then we go over and, well, look at these shoes. These shoes are we're looking for a blue shirt. Well, it took a while for me to figure out that for her, the experience of shopping was just as important as conquering the blue shirt. Getting the blue shirt. For me, it's all about getting the blue shirt. For her, it's about the shopping experience. And so I have adjusted my way of, not really my way of shopping, but my way of shopping with her to fit her. Most of the time they've got a chair in the women's section, and it is for us men to go sit in and be quiet. And so that's pretty much what I do when we go shopping. And so understanding your wife, know your wife. How are you ever going to love her if you don't know what her needs are? How are you ever going to meet her needs if you don't understand what they are? The only way that you're going to learn what her needs are is to spend time talking with her. And during that time talking with her, you're going to have to spend most of that time listening. So, live with your wife. Make that commitment. Know your wife till you have understanding of what makes her tick. And then meet her needs. And then third, honor your wife. He says, husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel. And so he says, honor your wife. To honor her means to give her respect. It means to recognize her value. Your wife is your greatest value, the thing that is most valuable in your life. And so recognize it. Now, when he says she is a weaker vessel, he's not talking about she can't stand pain like you can. You go have a baby and see how that works out for you. And so doesn't have anything to do with that. Doesn't mean that she's not as smart as you are. Doesn't mean that she can't reason as well as you do. He's just talking about physical strength. And for some of us, your wife may be stronger than you are, but the average man generally is bigger and stronger than his wife. In other words, if you put 100 average men on a tug of rope, put 100 average women on a tug of rope, the men would win. And it's just because that's the way God made us. And so physically we are made up differently, and we are stronger, should be stronger than our wives. And so we are to physically take care of them. That's what he's talking about here. He's not saying there's something wrong with her. He's saying that it's your responsibility to physically take care of your wife. And he goes on to say, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life. And so he says we're equal when it comes to every aspect of life. We are equal. If you remember in Galatians chapter 3, as he's talking about, Paul was talking about salvation. He's talking about focused in on salvation. He says there's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free, there's neither male nor female. Now, he's not saying that you get to choose what your gender is. He's not saying that there's no difference between us. There's no difference between Jews and Greeks. There is. There's no difference between slaves and free. Well, there is. And there is a difference between male and female. And so there's difference. But when it comes to salvation, when it comes to our spiritual walk, there is no difference. We all come to Christ the same way. We all are reconciled to God in the same way, and that is through Jesus Christ. And so Peter says, honor your wife. You are the protector. You are the leader in your home, or you should be. And so honor her, adore her, give her the honor that she needs. Dennis Swanberg was telling about a couple that came for counseling. I don't think it was him, but he came to some counselor, marriage counselor, and the husband obviously was just aloof and he was one of those guys that said, I told her I loved her when we got married, and I told her if anything ever changed, I'd let her know. In other words, he didn't ever tell her he loved her, didn't show her, nothing. And so she kind of poured out her heart to the counselor in front of the man. He just sat there like he wasn't interested. And finally the counselor told the wife, stand up. She stood up. He walked over and he grabbed her and gave her a big hug and kissed her and kind of gave her, dipped and kissed her, a long kiss, passionate kiss, stood her back up, and he looked at the man and he said, now, that's what she needs. And the man said, okay, should I bring her by Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday? And that's not what he was talking about. We need to treat our wife with honor and respect. And sometimes we treat them like denim when we should be treating them like silk. Proverbs chapter 31, verse 10, who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. Proverbs 12:4, an excellent wife is the crown of her husband. Proverbs 19:14, houses and riches are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. And so your wife was given to you from the Lord. Treat her that way. Treat her as your most valuable gift from the Lord. Open the door for her. That's not hard to do. That is not something that will strain you. It's not something that's going to cause you too much discomfort. Open the door for her. Open the door. When you get to a place where there's a door going into a building, out of a building, into the car, out, whatever, then open the door. It's just a little something that you can do to show her how valuable she is. Another thing you do is brag on her in front of people. Talk to people about how much you care for her. Talk to her about how important she is to you. Talk to them about the value that you place on your wife. And so live with your wife, not just being there physically, but live with her. Make a commitment to spend time talking with her, spend time with her so that you can know your wife. And in that time that you're having those conversations, actually listen to what she has to say. Don't dismiss it. Listen and ask her what her needs are. Ask her what she wants different about your marriage. You'd be surprised what she might tell you, but ask. If you want to know, ask. And then finally, honor her. Give her admiration. Do things for her that show her that you love her. And he tells us there right at the end why we need to do that. He says, husbands, likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. And so he says, do those things for your wife so your prayers won't be hindered. In other words, what he's saying is your relationship with your wife reflects your relationship with God. In other words, if you don't treat your wife right, then that is a clear indication that you are not right with God. that you are not submitting yourself to God. But also, it shows that your relationship with God is affected by your relationship with your wife. In other words, if you are arguing with your wife, if you're mean to your wife, if you're ignoring your wife, if you're not living with her, you're not seeking to know her, you're not honoring her, then you're not honoring God. And your relationship will be hindered. Your prayers will be hindered. You want God to hear your prayers? And be the husband that God wants you to be. Try to imagine with me that what your home would be like if you were to do these things. In other words, try to imagine a happy home, whatever it means to you that your home would be happy. You come home, you're not just going through the motions. You come home and you're not just tolerating or ignoring your wife. You come home and you are excited to be there. You come home and you are glad that you're home. You talk to your wife and you have conversation with her, and it is meaningful conversation. And try to imagine that. Well, guess what? It all starts with you. You are the leader of your home, and you are the one that should set the tone for how your home is going to be. So, men, love your wives by living with them, by knowing them, and by honoring them.